The best point or the best position, the best argument for why we would want to meet Q. And many of you talked about it, whether directly or indirectly. You talked about what that meeting might look like. Some of you talked about being blasted into a different time and place. Yes, completely understand. But the reason why Smoke Pants makes a great point is because Q kind of gets a little bit of a bad rap because of how Picard and the crew are so stiff and rigid. They're from Starfleet. They're on a mission. Every single time you meet them, it's not like they're just off duty, lounging around, having a good time. These are officers on duty of a military ship, right? That is exploring the galaxy by a means of gaining knowledge and gaining understanding of the universe, so that knowledge can help and gain perspective for those that are still left on Earth and for all of Starfleet, right? So I think it's the entire Federation kind of hinges on this, on the Enterprise D. And here's Q that goes up to these guys who are on duty, and Q clearly likes to poke at Picard, he likes to poke at the crew, he likes to see what kind of things they'll do. And so they can be kind of like an interesting laboratory experiment. And Picard and the crew are just very, that's not appropriate and you shouldn't be doing this and all that kind of stuff. But what I really like is that Q still, through all of it, kind of maintains a good humor. There is a very fun and whimsical quality about him. And I just found it to be a really endearing character. I mean, and I'm not a huge fan of Voyager, so I may have seen one episode ever of Q in Voyager. I'm not really interested in it. But what I do like is the play between Picard and Q is that kind of classic. It's kind of like Khan and Kirk, I mean, it's got that kind of, they respect each other's mutual respect, even though both of them were very, kind of at each other's throats all the time. Even though Picard could do nothing to really get back at Q, but we all know that. But in any case, think about the things that Q could do. You could open up all new kinds of parts of the universe for you, or show you things you could never possibly have imagined on your own. To give you perspective, to give you a glance at a reality that is far beyond your own. I just find that really interesting and fun. So I think Smoke Pants makes a great argument as to why, maybe Picard had his shot. Smoke Pants wants his shot. I'd like to sit down with Q, even if the fate of all humanity does lie in my hands. I'd love to just sit down with Q and say, "Hey, Q, let's go toe to toe, buddy. You want to talk? Let's talk," and kind of see what happened. Because I think most of us are put in that position with Q. First of all, we're not officers in Starfleet, so we don't have to be so stuffy. And second of all, I think we probably have a heck of a lot more fun with it than Picard does. So I think that would be a lot of fun. And lastly, in terms of comments, and I this week I tried to kind of strip things down to the people that made points that were just kind of the greatest hits here. Akira VGA made a great comment about Hugh of Borg, right? So and the idea simply for Akira VGA is that you get to talk to a Borg without the threat of violence, without the threat that they're trying to assimilate you and kill you and take over your family and kill your entire species, so on and so forth, right? Assimilation is very powerful. So the idea of meeting Hugh and having a conversation about the way that the Borg come together and the way that the Borg think, and the process of how they come to grips with the idea that they have this kind of drive that is almost evolutionary, this drive to go assimilate the entirety of the universe, and to do so in a place where they can kind of grow with technology and uniqueness of species, adding on to their kind of great experiment, as it were. I just think that would be a really cool perspective to get. And I think, by the way, that could go a lot of different ways. You could talk to Hugh, and Hugh could be, you could talk to Hugh kind of after the episode, and or what Hugh's perspective is kind of later on, right, after he gets a little bit perspective on it. Because I think those are probably two different things. But Hugh, right when he is kind of liberated, as it were, clearly is kind of wide-eyed and doesn't understand the universe. That would be a pretty cool place to sit down and say, could I just pick your brain for a little bit, because I bet you have a lot of fun things to tell me. In any case, I think those are all great suggestions. And they really do echo mine. And I want to say thank you to you guys for not really going out there and picking anything crazy like Kavash Faggio or, something just completely off the wall, which I would have had a much different time, kind of deciphering all those, the people you want to meet. But here is what I would say for my answer. And this was a tough one for me because I'd like to meet pretty much the entire crew. Remember that Rue said on the podcast in the Echo Screen Live that he would like to meet Beverly Crusher. I'm not sure what kind of motivations go into that. But in any case, he'd like to meet Beverly Crusher. Surprised nobody said Deanna Troi. Because Deanna Troi for me is way up there. She's not my pick, but let me just make a case for her for a second. I'd like to meet Deanna, not for what you're thinking. Well, maybe for what you're thinking. But the point is, I'd like to meet Deanna Troi for the empathic capabilities because I have a lot of questions, I think, don't we all? I think if any of us are worth our salt, we have a lot of introspection. We look at the things that we do. And wouldn't it be cool to talk to someone like her that could kind of probe a little bit into your mind and tell you, oh, well, this is why those things, this is why you feel that way, or these are the reasons you do those things. And I would love to get those questions answered. I think a lot of you would probably agree with me. I would really enjoy that. I'd like to see, and maybe that's a great question to ask at another time. What would be the question you ask Deanna Troi? In fact, I really like that. I'm going to write that down. But in any case, what kind of things could you open up and expand your own mind if you talk to Deanna Troi? I love the idea of meeting Geordi LaForge, and here's why. So Geordi there's a little bit of inspiration in the story of Geordi LaForge that I actually use quite frequently in my own life, in my own career, and in the things that I pursue. And this might sound ridiculous and stupid to some of you, but that's okay. You probably aren't Next Generation fans. But if LeVar Burton were here, I would tell him this. So there is that moment where Picard explains why he selected Geordi as his chief engineer on the Enterprise, and it's a really cool story where Geordi was kind of an underling. He was kind of working his way up, and he was on the ship that was actually carrying Picard at the time, who I believe this was before the Enterprise was even created. And Picard, as he gets off, meets Geordi and says to him, makes some kind of odd comment about how he felt like there was something a little bit, I guess, off with the engines. Not that necessarily he had any kind of issue or there was any problem. He just said, I was thinking a little bit, something felt a little strange about the engines. And he wakes the next day to find out that Geordi had spent the entire night working on trying to figure out what Picard might have seen with the engine and trying to boost the efficiency and trying to make it work in the best way he possibly could. And I think that's a really awesome metaphor for how we can attack the challenges we find in our own lives. And this is one of the reasons why I'd like to meet Geordi, because I think if you attack things with that kind of obsession and that kind of passion, that's the way I like to do things in my life. And I think that people that really are driven, that's how they like to do things as well. So Geordi inspired me in that regard, so I'd love to meet him to find out what kind of drives him and his passion and how he likes to do things. I think Riker is a great choice. I would love to meet Riker for several reasons. One, because I'm also a trombonist, but mostly because Riker's just awesome. He's just this kind of cool, calm, even-keeled guy. And I think, if I were going to be like probably just about anybody on the crew, I'd probably be most like him. Or I'd like to think that I would be most like him. Except for the fact that I would have to meet the person that I would want to meet, which is Jean-Luc Picard. And it's a close tie for me between Jean-Luc and Q. But here's why I love Picard. I love Picard because he's kind of he is the Renaissance man. He does, he's got all these tendencies. He's technical. He's got these kind of scientific ambitions with, not only biology, but also archaeology in terms of, studying history. He's a student of history. So he's a historian. He loves great literature. He loves great music. And he appreciates the finer things, right? And I think this is incredible. But he has all of that. But he's also kind of still, he's not an intellectual above all else. He's a leader above all else. And I think that's something that I would want to aspire to be. And I think if I could sit down with anybody in the crew, I would sit down with Jean-Luc and say, here you are this person, you've kind of come all this way. What kind of advice do you give somebody that is trying to be better, that's trying to improve, that's trying to be the best in what we do? And I'd love to hear what his answer would be in that case, because I think he'd have a lot of knowledge to share in that case. But you have Jean-Luc. He's still kind of a man's man. He still kind of has his strengths. He's a leader of men, but at the same time he's got this very artistic, scientific, technological sense about him. And I think if I'm most like anybody in the crew, I'm most like him, which is probably why I'd want to meet him. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. I would like to meet Jean-Luc Picard. I think everything you guys said is a perfectly acceptable answer. I could easily meet any one of them and be probably in the same situation as many of you are, but Jean-Luc just kind of does it for me. So there you go. So that's wrapping up the question for last week. Now this brings me to a very interesting question for this week that I think you guys are going to love. I think you're really going to take off with this. So I saw a film recently on Netflix that actually was about the National Film Registry. Now, for those of you that don't know what the National Film Registry is, or aren't American, so on and so forth, the National Film Registry in America was set up, I believe, in the early 90s. And it was set up at a time when, for very artistic reasons, Ted Turner, who owned a ton of movies, who bought a ton of old movies, decided he was going to go back and colorize them, which was to run them through a process that would kind of hand paint each and every frame so that he could bring color to some classic black and white films. And it made several filmmakers very, very, very upset. Chief among them, one George Lucas, who was pissed off at the idea that there would be a film that had been presented to the public and enjoyed and loved, and then someone many, many years later would go back to that film and alter it in a way that it was permanently changed from its original form. Wow. Ironic, isn't it? Anyway, so the point is, the film is about the National Film Registry, and the National Film Registry is set up at this time because Congress takes the advice of one George Lucas and says, hey, we need a national library of films, because films are a legitimate art form that are now a part of our American culture, and we need to save the best films that have ever been made in one place so that they can be enjoyed in their original form by audiences of all kinds for no commercial profit. And it was a very novel idea, and I thought it was it was great, and it's been going for many, many years. Now there are certain criteria that have to be met, and several of you wouldn't be surprised to find out that in the National Film Registry is Star Wars. Probably one of the only places where you could actually go and see the original Star Wars in its original form. Which is a huge source of contention, right? Films that you would know and love. The point is, there are several criteria. I believe the film has to have been out for 20 years. I believe, the reason why is because they wanted to kind of stand the test of time, so that people's initial, and so in 1998, people didn't go, oh, Titanic is the greatest movie ever made, it needs to go into the National Film Registry. No, right? Titanic might go into the National Film Registry, but it needs to age a little bit so that people can go back and watch it and go, what the hell were we thinking? Or, yep, this is just as good as it's ever been, it needs to be there, right? So several films get inducted every single year. All of that leads me to this. I started thinking about this concept. Wouldn't it be awesome to have a national video game registry? Now, I know that's kind of American-centric, for what we as Americans find to be, but that's okay. That's what we do. It's fine. It's part of the national archives here in America. So we want to chronicle the best of video games for Americans, right? So I think that's good. But that's not what my question